Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Doghouse Separation Anxiety Explained. I am Stacy Bell with Focused Fun in the US, and with me is...
me. Hello, Stacy. Hello, everybody. I'm Ness Jones, and I am from Australia, and I'm from Separation Anxiety in Dogs Decoded, and it's only 7 a.m. here this morning, and I'm still feeling quite tired today for some reason, but we are talking about thresholds today, which is one of the core things that we need to understand about when we're doing this type of training. So we'll discuss what they are, why we use them, and also how we use them. So, Stacy, what would be your layman's term to describe a threshold to our listeners and our viewers on YouTube? Make sure you subscribe.
Hello, viewers. I kind of think of it as the line between your dog being okay, so comfortable, and uncomfortable or not okay or anxious. In what we're talking about home alone behavior here. So it's, for me, that kind of that line that demarcates okay and not okay.
Yeah.
Is that layman enough?
Yeah, I describe it to my clients as almost like the panic line. So above the panic line is all those reasons that have come to me as a practitioner, the barking, the crying, the howling, the destroying things, the soiling, the attempts to escape, all those really obvious signs. And then under that panic line, the dog's fine. And then, of course, but I also say that panic line can be quite thick. So at the top of it, you're edging up towards those horrible behaviors that we don't want to see. But underneath that line, or in the lower part of the line, I'm not explaining this very well. How layman do you need it? Wake up, brain. At the bottom of the line is kind of the more subtle signs that are just leading into the full-blown panic.
So if we could kind of think of it as green is okay, comfortable, yellow is that kind of transition between being okay and panic, and then red is the panic, and that yellow for are those subtle signs. So they're kind of moving up the anxiety scale. And for some dogs, that can be quite wide, right? Like, so it takes them kind of a longer time to escalate from being okay to being panicked. And then other dogs, it can be quite narrow, and they go from being okay to absolutely panicking with all of those big behaviors that Nessa is talking about really, really quickly. So a lot of it is just knowing your dog and knowing kind of what behaviors they start showing when they're a little bit uncomfortable. So maybe at the beginning of that yellow zone.
I've got a question for you.
Yes.
So when you say red, yellow, green, are they like your stoplights in America?
Yes. Are they like your stoplights there?
A red, orange, green.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, should we change it to orange?
Anyway, no. I'm just curious. But yeah, definitely that some dogs have a really clear pattern too, don't they? So they exhibit all these subtle signs in quite a clear way each and every time, whatever they particular ones are. I had one client it would get off the couch. It was a greyhound. It would come to the door. You'd see a bit of whale eye. Then it would do a yawn, lick its lips. It generally did a big stretch. And then it would maybe start whining.
Right.
But each time it was quite clear where it was leading.
And that's really great. When a dog is very consistent about how the behaviors they show as they're escalating, because then you can start saying, every time the dog gets off the couch and heads towards the door, I should just come back then, because there's no sense in letting it escalate more. It's the dogs that throw something a little different at you every time that are a little bit trickier. I think you have to it's just more nuanced, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess that leads into why it's important for you as a homeowner, gosh. I tell you what, Stacey, my brain is just, I'm just feel completely wiped out this morning. I don't know
we
why.
even let you sleep in an hour and a half
later. I know. Homeowner, dog owner. Yeah, it's so important for dog
guardians. You want to go with guardian?
Yeah,
it's go with guardians. Parent, guardian.
Yeah. To understand what their dog looks like. So knowing your dog, and you're the best person to know your dog because you're with them all the time. So that's why it's really important to know what your dog's subtle signs are leading into the threshold.
And also, and we've talked about this before, but just to reiterate, because I think it's really important, is knowing what your dog's normal is, right? So what is normal when they're playing? What's normal when they're resting? What's normal when they feel anxious? What are their ears look like in each of those categories? What does their tail look like? What's neutral for your dog and what's anxious, and just really being a good observer all the time. So you can say, well, he was resting and he got up and stretched and yawned and licked his lips, but he does that all the time. Like every time he gets up, he does that. So then in a session, we're not going to be concerned about it if that happens in the same way. Now, sometimes we can see, a different intensity of those same behaviors, and we might then look a little bit more closely. But in a case where we're just looking at it and being like, yeah, that's normal for my dog. So that's really important too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always coach my clients in context as well. So is the dog scratching because it's like a displacement activity, or have they got an itch? Are they yawning because they just woke up, or are they yawning because they're stressed or they're trying to calm themselves down? Are they doing a shake off because they just woke up, or are they shaking off because they're a bit trying to get rid of some excess adrenaline or what have you? So context is so important.
Yeah. Right. Or like in Rowan's case, if the cat walks by, he might do some of those displacement behaviors. But it would, so you have to look at the context, right? So I do think that's important.
And even something is like, barking might be your dog's symptom of being anxious. But even in the context of that, it could be that they're barking because they heard a noise outside. So you have to know what your dog's barks sound like. I can tell when mine are barking because they're alerting on something, as in, Mum, we're not sure about this. Do you want to come and check it out? Or, hey, Mum, there's something out here. Come out here now. Rah, rah, rah. There's sort of something, alarm barking. So just knowing your dog, understand your dog, observe your dog. Yeah. And that's also important for not just in terms of anxiety, but just in terms of their general health. Have they got if they're not eating their food, is it because they're, well, I mean, that's an obvious one, but maybe if they're got a roach back and they're looking tucked up, something like that, are they uncomfortable in their stomach or something like that? Is that their normal? Is that what they normally look like, or is that, abnormal for that dog?
Right. Yeah. Well, and then that just brings us on to another point, which is just making sure that you have eyes on your dog, right? So
talking about eyes on my dog behind me has got a hot spot, and I'm going to have to put a collar on later because she's nibbled at her tail. I've just built beef liver treats everywhere.
You're like a strategy.
That'll keep them busy.
But just having a camera and a live stream when you're watching your dog, because you really, I think a really important part of the training is making sure your dog is not crossing over even into the yellow or orange. And if you're in Australia, now we have to ask Sarah
in the orange
about her stoplights, but yellow or orange, we don't even want the dogs to go in there because, remember that we're trying to build positive or neutral home alone experiences. So even if the dog is feeling a low level of anxiety, they're still feeling anxiety or discomfort or, however you want to label it. And that's not what we're trying to build here.
I think it's if we can capture the moment before we see any of those subtle signs, that's really what we want. And how do we do that, Stacy?
We make training plans.
And I see you.
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, yeah, like I said, we have to be watching the dog, but I think training without a plan is really difficult, because the tendency then is to push up until you see that first sign of anxiety every time, right?
Yes.
If you're training without a plan, that is what I think the biggest mistake that I see people who are trying to do it, or who have been trying to do it on their own, and then they come to me and they're like, this is what I've been doing. And that's like the most common mistake, is that they're training up until they see signs of anxiety. Even if they're small signs of anxiety, you're waiting until the dog's feeling uncomfortable. And that type of thing, that exposure to slightly uncomfortable experiences over and over, can end up sensitizing the dog or making them worse. So we just really want to be careful and intentional in the way that we're training.
Yes, indeed. I think most homeowners, Stacy, what's going on? Brain is misfiring this morning. I think most dog owners, oh goodness, there's more treats here. Most dog owners trying to do the training by themselves actually get to the point where they're seeing the severe signs, like the barking, for example. But yes, some of them that maybe understand their training concepts probably aren't nipping it in the bud soon enough. As you say, they're waiting till they see the subtle signs, instead of capturing that lovely moment when the dog's still chilled out with its legs in the air on the couch.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the most important thing we need in our training is a camera with a live feed. So it's all well and good recording the dog while you're out, and that can be very helpful, just so you know whether your dog has got separation anxiety, for example, or not, if you weren't aware of it. But if you're doing training, it should be done with a live feed so that you can come back in when needed. Yeah. So, Stacy, what does it look like when a dog goes over threshold into panic?
The red zone.
Dun, 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 dun.
So I think it's really important to remember that when dogs get to this stage, they're not making choices about their behavior, right? So they're not saying, I'm going to tear through this door frame. They're like in a panic. So they're like kind of at the phase where they're not in control of their behavior. So that's when, like, we are both fear-free trainers, so we're not going to punish a dog anyways, but that's where like punishment is just like heaping on and doesn't make sense, right? So it's heaping on the fear, but also the dog is not making conscious decisions, so it really doesn't make sense in that context anyways, even though we wouldn't use it. But so for some dogs, it's that frantic, chewing through their crate, and even to the point where they're injuring themselves, crashing through windows. And I know you have stories about this, chewing through drywall, chewing around door frames, and like just really destructive stuff. Or even, going to the bathroom, like losing control of their bowels, or, urinating. Some dogs are almost the opposite of that and completely shut down. Right. Like, so you might see them like cowering in a corner, like totally frozen, not moving. So those are both like kind of the extreme panic responses that you can see. And I do see this, I think I see it more like in people that I have worked with, or experienced discussions with, see more trying to escape out of the crate, especially when I'm working with people in rescue. A lot of times the rescue will say, put them in a crate, or, a stronger crate or whatever. And the dog is just so panicked that they can do a lot of damage to themselves and to the crate, trying to get out.
Yeah, for sure. Dogs that lose their bowels for me is a big one. I mean, that is, I mean, we're talking about dogs that are house trained already, and they just are so panicked. I think it must be so distressful for them just to be doing that, but also imagine the panic that they're in to have to like just not be able to control that. I mean, it's quite awful. But I've heard of dogs, as you say, jumping out of 2-story windows, breaking through the glass and jumping out of 2-story windows. I mean, that is panic. Trying to escape, like, well, certainly I had one client whose dog was kept in the backyard when they went out, when it doesn't have it anymore, separate, well, you know, it's got over it, separation anxiety, and was left in the backyard, managed to climb over their shed, cut its face, was gone down the road. Yes, so it's some of the things that dogs do, and, you know, obviously they destroy things in the house. Seem to like electronic devices for some reason, especially
or soft fluffy things, pillows and couches.
Yes, and the edge frames of couches and things like that.
Right.
Around exit points, of course.
That's a big one. Yeah.
So
when we're looking kind of at that, what we were talking about with the green, yellow, or orange, depending on what country you're in, or red, like the green zone, the dog is fine. It could be happy or neutral. The yellow/orange zone, the dog is kind of more aware of the scary thing, right? So being home alone in this case. And then the red zone is they're kind of like beyond thinking really, and they're in that panic place where they're not controlling their behavior. Whereas in the yellow/orange zone, they can still like control their behavior and think. So anyways,
it's like with a dog with say they're scared of thunderstorms, and if they're outside in the yard, they will be over that fence. They're, you know, unless they're the type that's going to go and hide somewhere in a corner on something, once they get over that fence, they're just going to run and run and run, and there's no thought. They're just so panicked, they're just going to go. And it's exactly that, isn't it? So getting to the point where you can't think anymore. It's just, oh God, it's just horrendous, really. To think that a dog could get into that state of mind. And I mean, you see it with horses as well, don't you? Like, I mean,
oh gosh,
totally off topic, but when they get scared, there's nothing there, you know, there's nothing in there.
Right. Yeah. They'll like run through fences and, you know, do a lot of damage to themselves that way, you know, really hurt themselves. And it's like, then afterwards you're like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's hard to watch.
Yeah. I mean, Mr. Big, the one that just went running out there, for people that are watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. We're getting some more subscribers too, Stacy. It's really good.
Yay!
Getting the message out there. But yeah, he when we first moved in here, he is noise phobic, and there was just so many weird noises around that he didn't understand. He's all right now, but what I didn't realize is the gate, and I was outside with them, right? So he wasn't out there by himself, but I didn't realize the gate at the back fence actually had a flap at the bottom, so it looks like it went. I mean, I knew it was there, but I thought it was kind of solid. I didn't realize that it was
right.
So he's a big dog. He's pushed under this little flap. And I just saw this kind of, it was like a swan dive. I just saw their head go, the front feet, then the head, then kind of the body. And then there was this
scoops under.
Then there was just these two little feet going out underneath this. And I'm like, oh my God. So I managed to get the other two back in, grabbed a lead, went bolting out the front, and he's out the front, but his tail's tucked, his body language was just awful. He wasn't thinking, he wasn't there. And he was just, luckily for me, he wasn't in full blown panic where he was just running, because there's no way I could have got him, but he was just, I'm going in this direction. And dogs with recall, if your dog recalls to you, no, he just was not listening. He did a big poop. So our neighbors across the road have got these immaculate lawns, like they're just, beautiful grass, beautifully kept, the sharp edges around the great big poop in the lawn. And of course, I didn't have any poo bags with me. I did go back and pick it up, but and he was just gone. And I just kept following him and trying to call him, managed to corral him into somebody's yard. But it was scary because luckily it was a quiet area, but we're surrounded by bushland too. So if he got into the bushland, I don't know what would have happened. But that for me was a really good example of, and that was mild. He wasn't in full blown. So
Right.
It's
I have
really
a story. When we lived in a neighborhood, now we don't, but we used to live in a neighborhood, and we had a pretty big lot, and we kept our horses at a barn, and we took them to our house because Molly, who is a Clydesdale, could pull a cart, and it was Christmas time. So we were going to have Molly pull the cart around the neighborhood to look at all the Christmas lights. And Molly was like super bomb proof. I mean, like, does not care about anything. So we're like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then we were going to take, I had a horse named Pepsi, name came with him, but his name was Pepsi, and he was not as bomb proof, but we took him with because we thought Molly would just feel better with another horse with her. So we did that, and we set up like a temporary fence in the backyard, and something spooked Pepsi, and he went through the fence, went running down the neighborhood street. And so like all of these, it's not a horse neighborhood. It is not a horse neighborhood. It's just like an ordinary neighborhood. So like all these people are outside, and they like stop and like look up, like, what? Like just like something out of a movie, right? And I just remember this one guy was doing like blowing some leaves, and he like turns around, and like Pepsi's like running by him, and he's like, and the only reason why I caught him is because there's like the manholes. Do you have like sewage holes, like and they have like the black cover, and like he stopped to sniff that in his panic, and I was able to catch him. But otherwise, like, I don't even know like what would have happened. It was like such a random thing. And then we never took them back to our neighborhood again. This is obviously not, Molly was fine. She was fine. She was fine. But Pepsi was not okay with it. So
yeah.
Mental note, don't bring him back. And then there was another time with a dog. We had a foster dog, and he was very fearful when we first got him. And we always called Rowan his emotional support dog, because he was always like, had to be touching Rowan, laying next to Rowan, and his new adopters adopted him and had him only for a couple nights, and he slipped out the door, and they could not get him. So I went with Rowan thinking that that would help, right? But he was like in these woods, and so we were like kind of tramping through the woods, and I had Rowan on a long line just to make sure we didn't, have two dogs out on the loose. And his name was Frankie. The other dog's name was Frankie. And like, we would catch sight of him, and Rowan would be excited to go see him, but then he was still running from us. Like, even if we weren't moving towards him, even if we were standing still, he would still, like, just because he was in that panic mode, and he wasn't thinking, oh yeah, that's my friend dog, let's go over there and say hi. It was like, the whole world is coming after me, is like pretty much what it, it felt like. It was a happy ending. He got home, stayed with the family, blah, blah, blah. But it was it took like 2 days to be able to capture him. But anyways, it just goes to show how different the mindset can be of a dog or animal when they are in that panic mode.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think we've covered everything to do with thresholds.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah. Guys, what we really, really want you to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel, because we like to offer you guys value, and I think we do that. I like to think we do that, even when I am half asleep and muddling my brain up. Yes. So, and you can see us in all our wonderful glory. So I am Ness Jones. You have been listening to Tales from the Doghouse, and thank you so much for listening and watching, hopefully. And I am in Australia from Separation Anxiety from Dogs Decoded.
Yep, and I am Stacy Bell in the US with Focus Fun. Thanks for joining us today.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.